We've got to talk about coaches. Some of them have unclaimed national championships.
You are Locked On Huskers, your daily podcast on the Nebraska Cornhuskers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, gang, Deep here, Locked On Huskers. Thank you for making Locked On Huskers the first watch and listen each and every single day. Greatly appreciate you, everydayers. Thank you for coming to hang out with us. Today's episode brought to you by the folks from Built Bar. Mark Onwater, let them know about Built Bar.
Thanks, DP. This episode of Locked On Huskers is brought to you by Built Bar. Now, if you're like me and you want to make healthier snack choices in your life, but you don't want to compromise on taste, you don't want all that sugar, you don't want all those calories, you've got to try Built Bars. Seriously, this stuff is amazing. The macros are incredible. 17 grams of protein, only 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar. And let me tell you about the flavors. All right, I tried a couple of them. I tried the cookies and cream Built Bar. I tried the coconut Built Puffs. Now, those are unlike anything you've seen out there. They're basically chocolate-covered marshmallows with 17 grams of protein in them. You've got to give them a shot. You can order them online at Built.com, find all the flavors there, or don't want to shop online, don't want to wait for shipping, just go over to your local Walmart or Sam's Club. You can find them there over in the pharmacy section with all that nutritious food. Over at Sam's Club, they've got that big box, 13 bars in a box, all the hit flavors in there, brownie batter puff, churro puff. Go give it a shot. Thank me later. Built Bars over at Built.com. DP, back to you.
Thank you, sir. Greatly appreciate it again throughout the course of this episode. We're gracious and thankful for you to spend your time. If you subscribed, thank you very much. If you have not, please do so. Click the button, get the alerts so you know when this content goes live each and every day. Huskers, every day. That's the plan. That's how we get down here on Locked On Huskers. I wanted to spend a little time today going back in the history, the coaching history. And outside of the bubble that is Nebraska, if you mention Nebraska coaches, right, of course, recent history, folks understand because of social media and that connection, people have a really good idea about Nebraska coaches. Within the bubble, folks can go back some generations. And if I asked you to pause and tell me who the head coach was before Bob Devaney, do you know who it is? Do you know the record? There's a lot of history in it. And over the course of this episode, this podcast, we want to go through some of the coaching history, some of the coaching record. And then there's another thing that I want to put an asterisk by that we'll get to in the final segment. Unclaimed national championships. Unclaimed. Which means that at some level, there's another discussion to be had. How many unclaimed national titles does Nebraska have? Yeah, we'll get to that in a later segment because I found it pretty interesting. If you're going to go through and talk about Nebraska, the history of this program, what a long, glorious history. I'll ask you another question. Who was Nebraska's first head football coach? Do you know the year? Pay attention because if you're talking Nebraska football in the coalition, it's 1890. The year is 1890, the first official year of Nebraska football. And the coach was Langdon Frothingham. That's a coach's name for you. Langdon Frothingham, who led the Huskers to 2-0 in 1890. Mainly because he was the only person on campus with a football. He had a football. You're the coach. Get to make the rules. Have at it. Year 2, T.U. Lynham, who had the brutal history of having coached one game and lost that game in 1891. In 1892, J.S. Williams led the Huskers to a 1-0 record. Then they moved forward to the first full season, full schedule Nebraska football coach, the very first. Frank Crawford with one of the great mustaches in the history of Nebraska football coaching. Fantastic hair and a fabulous mustache. Let's see if we can get Mark to throw that picture in there. Frank Crawford, who coached in 1893 and 1894. They were 9-4-1. Winning percentage was 67.679. Charles Thomas took over the Huskers. And again, they weren't the Huskers, so let me stand. He took over Nebraska and led them to an 1895 record of 6-3. And then one of the first great coach at Nebraska. And how you define that is this. In the previous episodes, we talked about the greatest players. And Nebraska has just a large pool of talented players. But there's some that have been awarded within that and have greater credential. The first coach to receive that sort of national credential, why? Being put into the College Football Hall of Fame, was Robbie Robinson, Eddie, who in 1896 and 1897 led Nebraska to an 11-4-1 record, and they won their conference. Nebraska won their conference. Now, back then, you're talking about the old Western Interstate Football Association. But you're talking about Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, Kansas. So Nebraska in both of those years had the best teams within those states, and that was passed along to Fielding Yost in 1898, who also won the conference title with a record of 8-3. It didn't go so well in 1899. Edwin Branch came in, dapper young man, but the misfortune of a 1-7-1 record at Nebraska to hand it over to Walter Bummy Booth, who, here's the thing that we have to get back to. All of the coaching pictures are very gentlemanly. Bow tie, suit. Those are the headshots. Hair, waxed and maxed and looking fabulous. But Walter, if I told you that Coach Booth coached for 6 seasons, only lost 8 games in the 6 seasons, 46-8-1. That 84.5 winning percentage. That's, ready for this? 3rd on the list. Coached until 1905. The next great coach was King Cole, who took over the program in 1907 until 1910, led Nebraska to a 25-8-3 record, and then the next Hall of Famer, Ewald O. Jumbo Stein, 1911 to 1915, 35-2-3, winning percentage of over 91%. Nebraska had found a thing it loved, and it figured out a way to do it. Same level of success, and then it dropped down under Henry Schulte and William Klein. Fred Dawson took over the Nebraska program in 1921 and led them to a 23-7-2 record, followed by Ernest Berg, 1925 to 1928, also 23-7-3. Another Hall of Famer steps in 1929. Dana X. Bible. 7 years as under leadership, 50 wins, 15 losses, 7 ties in the course of his career, inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame, I believe in 1946. So there was a run of coaches for Nebraska. Biff Jones also following Dana Bible into the College Football Hall of Fame. He ran the Nebraska football program from 1937 to 1941, 28-14-4. That's a pretty good stretch for Nebraska football. We'll pause there because we're going to rally it up forward and get into the years where the identity starts to take place and then the greatness happens. We'll do that when we come back to Lockdown. Hey, gang, thanks again for making Locked On Huskers your first watch and listen each and every single day. You can find it wherever you consume your podcast. It doesn't matter whether it's Amazon, YouTube. You can find this content, but if you subscribe, it's brought to you each and every day, and you don't have to worry about it. We got the Dana Bible and Biff Jones, right? That all being great coaching names. And then high levels of success, winning conference titles in the Missouri Valley, then also in the Big Six, right? So there was that range of identifying college football at that level, the Big Six programs, including Iowa and Missouri and Kansas and Nebraska. But then you reached 1941 with Biff Jones, and then there was kind of a dead period, a down period. Glenn Presnell in 42, Adolph Lewandowski in 43 and 44, Potsy Clark. Why are we not talking about Potsy Clark? George Potsy. There's a coach named Potsy. That's the best news I'm going to get all day today. There's a head coach named Potsy. I would have thought that eliminated you right away. But he led Nebraska from in 1945 and 1948, sandwiched filled in between by Bernie Masterson, 46-47. He was 5-13. Bill Glassford took over the Nebraska program in 1949, went 31-35-3. Pete Elliott ran the program in 1956 for 4-6. Bill Jennings took it over in 57, went all the way through 1961. Very popular decision when the decision was made to hire, finished 15-34-1. Message. And then we hit the rebirth of Nebraska football and the re-identification, the rebranding of Nebraska football and two of the all-time greats. So in 1962 to 1972, including the very first two national championships for Nebraska, Bob Devaney came in, took over the program, won 101 games against 20 losses and 2 ties. 101 wins in those seasons. Can we pause a moment, put our hand over our hearts, and feel good about what that was? If you were around for that, bravo. I was actually I was born in 1962. So as a young person, I was introduced to Bob Devaney and the Huskers in that era and ilk. Again, you're talking about Jerry Tagge in 71 making the Heisman finalist list. Johnny Rodgers and Rich Glover in 72. Another fact I didn't know, that Glover and Johnny Rodgers were in the finalists. Well, another time when the Huskers had 2 players in the Heisman finalists. Like the previous year, you had Tagge and Rodgers. Then you had Rodgers and Glover. Bob Devaney, you just had all the invitations to the Heisman Awards. Bravo for it. 1973, he hands it over to young assistant. And Husker fans know the story of the unpaid assistant coach, Tom Osborne. The unpaid assistant who takes over, gets in, plants himself, gets to work, changes the entire offensive scheme in 1970 to help them more modernized, more balanced offense as the offensive coordinator under Devaney, and then the head coach in 1973. And they go on a run that is very difficult to measure in real form and in current times. 255 wins, 49 losses, and 3 ties. That over the course of those 25 years, 356 wins against 69 losses. What would we do? What would Husker fans do to have that kind of success now? Anybody would. It didn't go that much downhill, in truth. Hindsight makes everybody 20/20. Frank Solich takes over in 98. Actually won a conference title. Solich went 58-19, which by most measurables keeps you in the job, except you're following the two legends that you followed, and then assumption leads to whatever happens after that. Bill Callahan replaces Solich in 2004. He goes 27-22. Bo Pelini is brought in 2008. Pelini wins 67 games, loses 27, a winning percentage of 71%, which, for whatever way you want to talk about it, was competitive and positive. He was followed by Mike Riley, 2015, who went 500 at 19-19, of course, followed by Scott Frost at 18 and from 18 to 21, who was 16-13, winning percentage of 34%. And now the next official head coach, and I say the official, count the 3 and 6 of Mickey Joseph as an interim coach, Matt Rhule will take over in 2023, and fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. History will tell us that after Nebraska's peak, it valleys and then it peaks again. By definition, the 16-31 is a valley. It's not an apex, it's a valley. And at some point, history tells us that Nebraska will regain its focus, energy, direction, and will get back in the 70 to 80 win category. Only once in history was Nebraska over the 90% in a coaching era business. There were stretches of 90%, but in their career, 90% was almost undoable, with the exception of one. To expect Nebraska to get back into the 90 win range, look, there hasn't been a Big Ten champion, conference champion, who didn't win 90% of their games, especially outside of the conference itself. You're talking about winning. In order to win the Big Ten Conference, 85%, 90% is going to be required. It's not that easy. Ohio State and Michigan are the only two programs who are in that space currently on a regular and consistent basis. Maybe the expectation is a little too high. Maybe being spoiled in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s is real. Maybe the expectations are too high. Or maybe this is the chance for another great Nebraska football run. 80%. That's the number of greatness. 80%. We'll throw the break there. I was also told that there were unclaimed national champions. There were 6 unclaimed national championships. 6. We'll talk about those. We'll come back and close out. Hey, gang, thank you once again for making Locked On Huskers your first watch, for hanging out. Greatly appreciate that. Means a lot. And if you're everydayers, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Depending on who you ask, where you look, the number of national championships for Nebraska, we think of the Devaney era championships. We think of the Osborne era championships. But there are other ways to determine national championships. It's not like the national championship game and the bowl championship series existed back in the 70s and 80s. It didn't. It really wasn't. It was about opinion polls. The games weren't actually decided. The championships weren't exactly decided on the football field like they are now. Now you can have a great season, you have a bad game, and off you go, and there's no more discussion. You can't be national champions. But back in the early days of college football, or in the earlier days of college football, there were all sorts of factions in play, and there were all sorts of credentialed voters for national championships. And Nebraska could, if they would, claim up to, depending on who you talk to and where you look, 9 unclaimed national championships. 6 to be very specific, are the ones that I kind of locked in on. But think of it this way, that the 1980 Huskers, who were 10-2 in that final stretch. If you wanted to look at the team that went to the Sun Bowl, beat Mississippi State 31-17, finished with a 10-2 record, they actually had a faction that still voted them number 1 at the top of their poll. In 1981, the team that lost to Clemson 22-15 in the Orange Bowl still had, at 9-3, still had the National Championship Foundation itself, which was established by Mike Ryder, picked Nebraska as the best team in college football in 1981. 1982, same story, right? 12-1 record under Coach Osborne, go to the Orange Bowl and beat LSU 21-20. Well, yes, indeed, there were factions that chose Nebraska. The old quality point rating system picked Nebraska as the best team in the country, even after that bowl game. 1983, 12-1 team. Again, you're one extra point away from just moonwalking into a unanimous and agreed national championship. They failed the 2-point conversion, lost the game 31-30, but there were still 7 credentialed NCAA voting factions that chose Nebraska as the best team in the country that year. 7. In 1984, team that once again beat LSU in a bowl game, and I did not, you don't think about it, but you think of rivalries. But a lot of Nebraska's history is tied directly to LSU. We don't even think about it, but in 1984, you go to Sugar Bowl, you dominate LSU 28-10, you finish the season 10-2, and there was a faction, a voting faction that chose Nebraska as the best team in college football in 1984. 1993, 11-1, they go to the Orange Bowl and lose in a controversial game to Florida State. They lose 18-16, but there was still a faction that at 11-1, that one lone loss, still deemed Nebraska the best team in college football. That is at least 6 of the 9 situations and circumstances where Nebraska could claim a national title. Don't know the particulars on why Nebraska chooses to claim or chooses not to claim, but it's pretty cool to consider. In a lot of cases, Nebraska was one play away. In all of those cases, even the games that they won, there's one play in a previous game that kept Nebraska from having at least 6 additional national championships. The difference between great and elite, one play along the way. Part of that, Nebraska, 6 more undisputed national championships. One play away. Man, we'll wrap it up there, and I will applaud you once again for making Locked On Huskers your first watch and listen each and every single day. Greatly appreciate it. And we'll close with the 3 words we love so much. Go Big Red.